The year was 2247 and space wasn't the silent, empty void people once imagined. It buzzed with voices, thousands of them coming from every corner of the known galaxy. More than 200 different civilizations had sent their best diplomats, generals, and scholars to meet on a massive space station called Accord Prime. It hung in orbit above a quiet planet named Virelia, chosen because no one claimed it, and no one had ever fought over it. That made it the perfect place for peace talks, or so they hoped. But this wasn't really about peace. Not anymore. For over a century, humanity had been the galaxy's wild card. Just 150 years ago, humans were barely crawling out of their own solar system, squabbling over borders and resources like children fighting over toys. Then something changed. They cracked faster than light travel. They built ships that could cross star systems in days. They settled new worlds, not with slow, careful steps, but with the speed of a wildfire. 37 star systems now flew Earth's flag, and they weren't asking permission. To the older races, the ones who'd been sailing the stars for thousands of years, this was deeply unsettling. The Xanthari, calm and ancient, saw humans as reckless children playing with fire. The Kavor, proud warriors with armor made of living metal, saw them as a threat that needed to be contained before it grew too strong. And so the Galactic Concord, the loose alliance that kept the peace among the stars, called humanity to the table, not to welcome them, to warn them. Inside the grand chamber of Accord Prime, the air hummed with tension. The room was shaped like a half-sphere, its walls lined with shimmering panels that shifted color with the mood of the crowd. Delegates from species with too many eyes, too few limbs or bodies made of light sat in tiered rows, all watching the center stage. There, a small group of humans stood, just 5 of them, surrounded by towering aliens twice their size. They looked out of place, almost fragile, but their eyes told a different story. They weren't afraid. The lead speaker for the Concord stepped forward. He was Xanthari, tall, silver-skinned, his voice smooth like water over stone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word carried weight. For over a century, he began, you have expanded without restraint. You ignore trade protocols. You refuse cultural integration. You build weapons in secret and test them in neutral zones. The Concord has shown patience, but patience has limits. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some species nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. The Kavor envoy crossed his arms, his armor clicking like stone on stone. The choice is simple, the Xanthari continued. Halt all colonization beyond your current borders. Surrender control of your military fleet to Concord oversight, and accept our cultural liaison program to ensure your people understand galactic norms. Refuse, and you will be sanctioned. Isolated. Cut off from all trade, travel, and communication. It was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet, but underneath it was a cage. The human delegation didn't react. No gasps, no angry outbursts, just silence. Their lead ambassador, a woman with tired eyes and a posture that said she'd carried too many burdens, stood perfectly still. She didn't look at the Xanthari. She didn't look at the Kavor. She stared straight ahead as if seeing something none of them could. Minutes passed. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Some aliens began to whisper. Was this defiance? Confusion? Had they broken them already? Then finally she moved. She didn't speak. Instead, she tapped a small device on her wrist. A hologram flickered to life above the center of the chamber, a grainy, flickering image of deep space. Stars drifted in the background, and in the foreground a ship floated, broken and dark. It wasn't human. It wasn't any known design. Its hull was twisted, scarred by wounds that didn't match any weapon in the Concord's database. A hush fell over the room. The ambassador's voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, steady, and sharp as glass. That ship, she said, was found drifting near the edge of the galaxy. No life signs, no distress calls, just silence. Our long-range scouts picked it up 3 months ago. We spent weeks decoding its logs. It belonged to a species called the Vorak. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. The Vorak, a name from ancient myth, a civilization so advanced they'd mapped the entire galaxy before vanishing without a trace over 12,000 years ago. Most thought they'd died out from war or plague. Some believed they'd ascended to another plane of existence, but the truth was far worse. The hologram shifted. Text appeared, translated by human linguists, alongside shaky audio. A voice trembling, speaking in a language no one had heard in millennia. They came from the dark between galaxies. Not from another star. Not from another system. From outside. We thought we were alone in the universe. We were wrong. They do not speak. They do not negotiate. They consume. And when they are done, there is nothing left. Not even memory. The chamber was dead silent now. Even the Kavor looked shaken. The ambassador let the words hang in the air. Then she added softly, "We didn't expand because we wanted to conquer. We expanded because we needed eyes everywhere. We built ships not to fight you but to watch the void. And what we saw scared us more than any of you ever could." She paused, then looked directly at the Xanthari. "You asked us to stop. But while you were debating trade routes and cultural sensitivity, we were listening to the silence between the stars. And that silence is getting louder. No one spoke. No one moved. For the first time in centuries, the mighty civilizations of the galaxy felt small. And the humans, those fragile, fast-breeding newcomers, suddenly didn't seem so small at all. The peace talks hadn't collapsed yet. But everyone in that room knew they were standing on the edge of something far bigger than diplomacy. Something that didn't care about borders, alliances, or pride. Something that was coming. The silence after the recording ended wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the whole station had stopped breathing. Even the soft hum of life support seemed to fade into the background. Every alien in that chamber, no matter how many eyes they had or how thick their armor was, stared at the fading image of that broken ship. The Vorak, a ghost from history, and now proof they hadn't just disappeared, they'd been erased. The human ambassador didn't move. She just stood there, hands at her sides, watching the faces around her shift from suspicion to something far more unsettling. Fear. Not the kind of fear you feel before a fight. This was deeper. The kind that creeps in when you realize the rules of the game have changed, and you never even knew there was a game. For 3 full days, nothing official happened. The Concord called emergency sessions behind closed doors. Delegates argued in hushed tones in corridors lined with glowing vines and humming data panels. Some demanded the humans were lying, that this was a trick to gain sympathy or military leverage. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, Earth had stumbled onto something real. But while the galaxy debated, the humans didn't wait. Back on their ships docked at the station's outer ring, their scientists and engineers worked nonstop. They weren't hiding, they were sharing. One by one, they invited trusted observers, Xanthari archivists, Kavor sensor specialists, even the quiet plant-like mycelians, into their data rooms. No secrets, no conditions, just raw information laid bare. What they showed wasn't theory. It was evidence. Star charts lit up with red markers, dozens of them, scattered across dead worlds long written off as natural disasters. A planet in the Andromeda Fringe, its surface glassed not by war but by an energy signature that didn't match any known weapon. Ruins on a frozen moon, where ancient carvings showed beings fleeing not from each other but from something in the sky with no shape, no face, just hunger. And in every case buried deep in soil or ice or ash, the same faint residue, a strange particle decay pattern that defied known physics. "This isn't random," a human scientist explained, pointing to a rotating 3D map. "It repeats, every 11,000 to 13,000 years, like a tide, and the last time it happened, the Vorak vanished." The Kavor envoy, who'd entered the room with his usual swagger, now stood with his arms loose at his sides, his armor dimmed. "You're saying something comes from outside the galaxy?" he asked, voice lower than usual. "Yes," the scientist replied, "and it doesn't want resources. It doesn't want slaves. It doesn't even seem to notice us until it's too late. It just consumes. Stars, planets, life, data, everything, like it's feeding on existence itself." Meanwhile, on the main observation deck of Accord Prime, the human ambassador stood alone, staring out at the stars. A Xanthari elder joined her, floating slightly above the floor on a cushion of anti-grav energy. "You could have told us sooner," the elder said gently. "We tried," she answered, not turning. "5 years ago, we sent a message through every open channel. We included the Vorak data, the energy signatures, the timeline. Out of 200 conquered members, 17 replied. 9 called it a hoax. The rest ignored us." The elder was silent for a long moment. "We assumed you were exaggerating. or desperate for attention. "We weren't asking for attention," she said. "We were asking for allies." Then, without warning, alarms blared through the station. Not the sharp, urgent kind that meant attack, but a deep, resonant tone that signaled a Priority 1 astrophysical alert. Every screen in the hallway lit up with the same image, a ripple in deep space far beyond the galactic rim. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a storm. It was a distortion, vast, slow-moving, and growing. Sensors showed it traveling at nearly 80% the speed of light, and it was heading straight for the Orion Arm. The humans had detected it weeks ago. They'd been tracking it in secret, refining their models, testing countermeasures in abandoned systems. But now, with the Conquered watching, they made it public. Within hours, the truth was undeniable. The energy signature matched the residue found on those dead worlds. The pattern was identical to the Vorex's final logs. Panic began to spread. Some delegations demanded immediate evacuation of outer colonies. Others called for total lockdowns. A few even suggested surrendering to whatever was coming, hoping it might spare them if they offered no resistance. But the humans did something different. They didn't panic. They prepared. While alien diplomats argued over protocol, human crews were already moving. Supply ships rerouted. Mining colonies powered down non-essential systems. Long-range telescopes focused on the distortion wave, feeding data back to Earth and its allied stations. And deep in hidden shipyards, prototypes that had been labeled experimental were suddenly marked active deployment. What shocked the galaxy most wasn't the tech. It was the attitude. Humans weren't praying. They weren't begging. They were calculating, building, training. They spoke about the threat like it was a storm they couldn't stop, but one they could survive if they were smart enough, fast enough, tough enough. One Kavor officer, watching a human crew run drills on zero-gravity weapon mounts, turned to his commander and said, "They don't act like prey. They act like hunters." And that was the moment the fear shifted. It wasn't just fear of the unknown anymore. Now the galaxy was afraid of what humans might do if pushed, because while everyone else was still trying to understand the threat, humanity had already decided they wouldn't wait to be saved. They'd fight. And if no one stood with them, they'd fight alone. Back in the main chamber, the ambassador finally addressed the Concorde again. This time she didn't play a recording. She spoke plainly, like someone explaining the weather. "We didn't come here to ask for your permission," she said. "We came to give you a choice. You can keep treating us like children who need to be controlled. Or you can see us for what we are, the first line of defense. Because whatever's coming, it won't care if you're Zinthari, Kavor, or human. It won't care about your history, your art, your laws. It will just erase you." She paused, then added, "We've spent the last century building more than colonies. We've built warning posts, early detection grids, and weapons that burn holes in reality. Not to dominate you. To buy time. For all of us." The room stayed silent. But this time the silence wasn't disbelief. It was realization. The peace talks hadn't just collapsed. They'd become irrelevant. Because the real enemy wasn't in the room. It was out there, in the dark between galaxies, and it was already on its way. And for the first time, the galaxy understood why humans had never asked to join the club. They'd been too busy building the walls around it. In the days that followed, the station felt less like a place of diplomacy and more like a ship caught in a storm. Everyone scrambling, voices overlapping, decisions being made in hallways instead of meeting rooms. The humans didn't gloat. They didn't say, "We told you so." Instead, they opened their doors wider. They invited teams from every major species onto their vessels, not as guests but as partners. "See for yourself," they said. "Don't take our word. Look at the data. Touch the evidence." And so they did. Zinthari scholars pored over ancient star maps cross-referenced with human sensor logs, their long fingers tracing lines that connected long-dead civilizations like dots in a nightmare. Kavor engineers ran diagnostics on human-made shield generators, stunned to find they used principles their own race had abandoned centuries ago as too unstable. Even the mycelians, normally silent, drifting through space like living forests, sent spore carriers that gently interfaced with human data cores, sharing biological memory patterns that matched the same extinction cycles. One by one, the doubters fell quiet, but belief wasn't enough. The real test came when the Kavor High Command demanded proof the threat was real and immediate. "Show us it's coming," their war leader challenged, standing tall in the central briefing room, his armor pulsing with restrained energy. Not a ripple in the void, not a ghost signal. Show us the enemy. The humans didn't argue. They simply activated a live feed. On the main screen, stars glittered in perfect stillness, then far in the distance, space itself seemed to warp. Not like a black hole bending light, but like fabric tearing. A patch of darkness grew, not by blocking light, but by erasing it. Stars behind it didn't twinkle. They vanished. Sensors screamed as gravitational anomalies spiked, then flatlined as if reality had glitched. "This is real time," a human officer said quietly. "From observation post Theta, 12 light-years beyond the galactic rim. The distortion wave is accelerating. Estimated arrival at the nearest inhabited system, 87 days. The HFY War leader didn't speak for a full minute. When he finally did, his voice was stripped of all pride. "What do you need?" That question changed everything. Suddenly, it wasn't humans versus the conquered, it was us versus it. And the humans, who had spent decades being called reckless, impulsive, and dangerously independent, now became the unlikely architects of survival. While other species debated strategy in endless councils, humans acted. They shared blueprints for early warning satellites that could detect the distortion's unique energy decay. They offered to retrofit alien ships with human targeting systems that could lock onto the anomaly's weak points, places where space-time frayed just enough to be vulnerable. They even handed over raw schematics for a new kind of weapon. Not a bomb, not a beam, but a device that fired compressed chunks of neutron star matter at near light speed. It won't destroy it, they admitted, but it might slow it down. And time is the one thing we can't make more of. What surprised everyone wasn't the tech, it was the mindset. Humans didn't hoard knowledge. They gave it away freely, even to species that had openly mocked them just weeks before. When asked why, a young engineer from Mars Colony simply shrugged and said, "If your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't charge them for the hose." But the most unsettling revelation came from Earth's deep archives, buried in old military records, declassified only after the summit, were reports from the 21st century, strange signals picked up by radio telescopes, unexplained energy bursts from deep space. Back then, scientists had dismissed them as glitches or cosmic noise, but now, re-examined with alien data, they fit the pattern perfectly. Humanity hadn't just stumbled onto this threat recently. They'd been hearing its whispers for over 200 years. They'd just been too small, too divided to understand what it meant. That realization hit hard. While ancient civilizations slept in their golden ages, assuming the galaxy was stable and safe, humans, still patching up their own world after centuries of war and climate collapse, had been listening to the dark. And when they finally got the tools to look deeper, they didn't turn away. They leaned in. Now, with the conquered watching, they revealed their true strategy. They hadn't been building an empire. They'd been building a net. Outposts weren't just colonies, they were sensor nodes. Mining operations doubled as weapon forges. Civilian freighters carried hidden drone launchers. Every human settlement beyond Sol was part of a vast, silent defense grid designed not to win a war, but to buy time for the rest of the galaxy to wake up. And it was working. When the first minor tendril of the distortion brushed against a dead moon near the Perseus arm, human drones activated automatically. They didn't attack. They probed, firing calibrated pulses that mapped the anomaly's structure. The data streamed back instantly, and was shared with every Concord member within seconds. For the first time, the enemy had a shape. Not a ship, not a creature, but a process. A self-replicating tear in spacetime that fed on complexity. The more advanced a system was, more life, more technology, more data, the more it attracted the distortion. That's why the Vorak, the most advanced civilization of their age, had been the first to fall. And that's why humanity, with its messy, chaotic, overbuilt networks, was now the brightest beacon in the dark. The terrifying truth settled over the station like cold fog. Humans weren't just ready to fight. They were already in the fight, and they'd been fighting alone for longer than anyone knew. As the days passed, something unexpected happened. Species that had never spoken to each other began working side by side. Centauri navigators helped plot safe evacuation routes. HFY pilots trained with human flight sims. Mycelian bioships started weaving organic armor around human hulls, strengthening them in ways metal never could. But through it all, the humans remained calm, not because they weren't afraid they were, but because fear had long ago turned into fuel. They'd grown up with stories of extinction, of their own planet nearly dying from within. They knew how fragile existence was, and that knowledge had forged something rare in the galaxy, a species that didn't just survive crisis, but expected it. Now, as the countdown to first contact with the distortion ticked away, the humans did the one thing no one else had thought of. They broadcast a message, not to the enemy, but to every world in the galaxy. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a plea. It was a signal of unity, a single frequency repeating every 10 seconds, carrying a simple pulse. The combined genetic signature of every major species in the conquered, woven together with human DNA, a declaration that they were no longer separate, that they were one civilization now, flawed, scared, but standing together. And as that signal spread through the stars, even the oldest aliens felt something they hadn't in millennia: hope. Not because they believed they'd win, but because, for the first time, they weren't facing the dark alone. The message went out not with fanfare but with quiet certainty. No dramatic music, no grand speech, just a steady pulse of data beaming from every human ship, every station, every colony, repeating like a heartbeat across the stars. It carried the combined biological and digital signatures of over 200 species, stitched together by human engineers in a single unified signal, a declaration that the galaxy was no longer a collection of separate worlds, but one living system, one family, one target. But that wasn't the terrifying part. What truly shook the Concord came next. After days of cooperation, shared data, and joint planning, the human ambassador requested one final broadcast. This time not to the stars, but directly to every government, every military command, every civilian network in the known galaxy. The Conquered agreed, assuming it would be a call for unity, a rallying cry before the storm hit. They were wrong. When the transmission began, the screen showed not a face, not a flag, but the cold void of space, stars unmoving, silent. Then the ambassador's voice came through, calm but edged with steel. "We offered peace," she said. "You offered chains." A pause. Long enough for the words to sink in. "You asked us to stop growing, to surrender our ships, to let you decide what we could think, where we could go, who we could become. You called us reckless, dangerous, unready." Another silence. Somewhere on a HFY warship, a young pilot turned down the volume, uneasy. "Well," the voice continued, "while you were busy drawing lines in the sand, we were watching the horizon, and what's coming doesn't care about your rules. It doesn't care if you're ancient or young, peaceful or warlike. It only cares if you exist. And if you do, it will erase you." Then came the part that made entire fleets go still. "We do not ask for your trust," the voice said. "We ask for your courage. The enemy does not negotiate, it does not warn, it consumes. And if you will not fight, then move aside." The screen flickered. Now it showed human shipyards, massive orbital rings glowing with activity. Shuttles darted like fireflies. Hulls of new warships, sleek and sharp, slid out of dry docks. Civilian freighters were being retrofitted with railgun mounts. Mining drones were being reprogrammed to carry antimatter pods. Entire colonies were powering down non-essential systems, diverting every watt of energy to defense grids. "We will not wait for consensus," the voice said. "We will not wait for permission. If you stand with us, you'll have our backs. If you hide, we'll fight around you. But if you get in our way, we will go through you." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and that promise terrified the galaxy. Not because humans were cruel, but because they meant it. They weren't bluffing, they weren't posturing. They had already accepted the cost. Billions might die, worlds might burn. But they would not kneel. Not to the conquered. Not to the void. Across the stars, reactions poured in. Some worlds panicked, others rallied. A few isolationist systems shut down their comms entirely, hoping to disappear. But most felt something they hadn't in generations: shame. Because while humans had spent decades preparing for the end of everything, the rest of the galaxy had been arguing over trade tariffs and cultural etiquette. Within hours, the Kavor High Command did something unprecedented. They opened their legendary Forge Worlds, planets where weapons were born in molten rivers, and invited human engineers to help upgrade their plasma lances. The Xanthari, who had guarded their phase shield technology for 10,000 years, released the core schematics to every allied fleet. Even the Mycelians, who rarely interfered in mechanical conflicts, began seeding defensive spores along the frontier, living barriers that could absorb and redirect the distortion's energy. But the real shift wasn't in tech, it was in spirit. Human crews started taking alien volunteers aboard their ships, not as observers, but as crewmates. A Xanthari navigator learned to read human star charts. A Kavor gunner trained alongside a human pilot, their different reflexes syncing over time. In mess halls, beings who'd never shared a meal before sat together, eating nutrient paste and swapping stories of home, knowing some of those homes might not exist in a few months. And through it all, humans remained human. They cracked jokes during drills. They played old Earth music over comms to stay calm. They wrote letters to loved ones they might never see again, not with despair, but with love. That raw, messy, stubborn humanity was what finally broke through the alien walls. It wasn't perfection they offered. It was heart. Then came the first real test. A scout probe launched by a joint human Kavor team drifted too close to the leading edge of the distortion wave. Instantly it vanished. Not destroyed, but unwritten. Its signal didn't cut out. It simply ceased to have ever existed. The data it had sent back in its final millisecond showed something chilling. The distortion wasn't just consuming matter, it was consuming information, memory, history, identity. That's when the galaxy understood the true horror. This wasn't just death, it was oblivion. And humans who had spent centuries preserving their stories, through books, through films, through songs, knew better than anyone what that meant. So they did the only thing they could. They began broadcasting everything. Every poem ever written, every symphony ever played, every child's laugh recorded on a home device, every scientific discovery, every recipe, every love letter. They beamed it all into deep space, not to be heard but to exist. To say, we were here. We mattered. Even as warships armed and fleets formed, this quiet act of defiance spread. Xanthari monks sang their oldest chants into open channels. Kavor warriors recorded their battle oaths. Mycelian elders released memory spores carrying the scent of their homeworlds. And at the center of it all were the humans, organizing, coordinating, fighting, yes, but also reminding everyone why they were fighting. Not for territory, not for pride, for the right to remember, to hope, to keep building, even in the dark. When the first tendril of the distortion finally brushed against the outer edge of the Orion arm, the joint fleet was ready. Not perfect, not invincible, but united. And as the first shots were fired, human railguns screaming through vacuum, Kavor plasma lighting up the void, Xanthari shields bending reality itself, the galaxy realized something profound. The terror wasn't that humans were willing to fight. It was that they were willing to lose and keep fighting anyway. Because for them, survival wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to let the light go out. And in that refusal, they gave the entire galaxy a reason to stand tall, not as separate species but as one people facing the dark together. The battle didn't start with a bang. It started with silence. One moment, the edge of the Orion arm was calm. Stars shining, patrol ships drifting in formation, comms humming with routine checks. The next, space itself seemed to stutter. Stars flickered out like candles in a wind that shouldn't exist. Sensors went wild, then dead. And then nothing. Just a growing patch of wrongness, spreading like ink in water. But this time, the galaxy was ready. Human railgun platforms, anchored near dead moons, fired first. Not blindly, but with terrifying precision. Tungsten rods the size of buildings accelerated to near light speed, punching through the distortion like needles through smoke. Where they hit, the void rippled, recoiling for a fraction of a second. It wasn't destruction, it was disruption, and disruption bought time. Kavor dreadnoughts followed, unleashing plasma lances that carved glowing wounds in the anomaly. Zenthari cruisers wove phase shields around vulnerable outposts, bending space-time just enough to keep the distortion from latching on. Mycelian spore ships bloomed in the dark, releasing clouds of bioluminescent particles that somehow confused the entity, slowing its advance, if only for minutes. It wasn't a clean fight. It wasn't even a fair one. Entire squadrons vanished without a trace. Some ships didn't explode, they just stopped being. Their signals erased, their crews forgotten before their last breath could echo through comms. But the Alliance held, not because they were winning, but because they refused to break. And at the heart of it all were the humans. While others fought with elegance or brute force, humans fought with grit and improvisation. When a Kavor shield failed, a human frigate would barrel in, dumping its entire cargo of mining drones, now rigged with pulse charges, into the breach. When Zenthari sensors overloaded, human engineers jury-rigged old Earth satellites to pick up the slack, patching systems together with code written on the fly. They lost more ships than anyone, but they also adapted faster than anyone. One tactic became legend: the black hole gambit. Using stolen Voric schematics and human math, they lured tendrils of the distortion toward dormant micro-black holes, remnants of ancient cosmic events, and triggered controlled collapses. The resulting gravity wells didn't destroy the enemy, but they trapped it, buying weeks of precious time. It was reckless, it was brilliant, and it was pure human, using chaos as a weapon. The battle raged for months. Colonies were evacuated, worlds were abandoned, billions were lost. But something shifted in those long, dark weeks. The old divisions, species, ideology, history, melted away. A Zenthari medic saved a human pilot with hands that glowed with healing light. A Kavor warrior gave his last charge to shield a mycelian seed vessel. And humans? They kept broadcasting. Even as their ships burned, their final transmissions weren't distress calls, they were songs, stories, messages to the future. Remember us. Keep going. Then, slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The distortion began to weaken, not because it was defeated, but because it was confused. The constant barrage of unpredictable tactics, human chaos mixed with alien precision, disrupted its pattern. It fed on order, on predictability. But the Alliance was anything but predictable. They attacked from angles it couldn't calculate. They used biology, physics, even art, Zenthari harmonic frequencies, Kavor war chants, human jazz, to create interference it couldn't process. In the final push, the fleet didn't charge. They danced. A swirling storm of ships, each playing their part, weaving a net of energy, matter, and memory so complex the distortion couldn't consume it all at once. And in that moment of hesitation, humanity fired its last desperate weapon, a pulse forged from every broadcast ever sent, the combined voice of the galaxy, compressed into a single beam of pure existence. The distortion didn't scream, it unraveled. Not destroyed, nothing that old could truly die, but scattered, driven back into the intergalactic dark, its hunger unsatisfied but its path broken. When the stars returned, the silence was different. Softer, full of grief, yes, but also awe. In the aftermath, no one celebrated. There were too many empty chairs, too many silent comms channels. But something new began to grow from the ashes. The Galactic Concord was gone. In its place rose the Sentinel Accord, a union not of treaties but of shared survival. Earth wasn't given a seat at the table. It was the table. Not because humans demanded it, but because no one else could imagine facing the unknown without them. Alien children now learn about the human resolve in school, not as a myth, but as a lesson. They're taught that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act anyway. That preparation matters more than pride. That listening to the quiet warnings can save worlds. And when new anomalies appear at the edge of sensors, faint ripples, strange echoes, no one debates. No one hesitates. Fleets mobilize. Scientists share data. Broadcasts begin anew, because the galaxy learned the hardest truth that day. Peace isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of vigilance. And humanity, once seen as loud, messy, and too fast, had been the only ones paying attention to the silence between the stars. Now, when ships pass Earth's solar system, they don't just see a planet. They see a beacon. Not of power, but of promise. The promise that even in the face of total erasure, someone will stand. Someone will fight. Someone will say, "Not today." And that's why, years later, when a young alien cadet asked an old human veteran how they stayed brave during the darkest days, the answer was simple. We weren't brave. We were just tired of losing. So we decided to be the last ones standing, even if we had to stand alone. But they didn't stand alone. And that, more than any weapon or victory, was the real miracle. The peace talks had collapsed. But from that collapse, something stronger was born. Not an empire, not a hierarchy, but a family of stars, watching the dark together, ready to light it up again if they had to. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of a rebuilt station, a human engineer hums an old Earth tune while fixing a comms array, just in case the silence ever starts to grow again.